We have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Michael Gumet, data specialist for community schools at After School for Children's and Teen Now, okay, Act Now Coalition. Michael serves as the data specialist for community schools at Act Now Illinois, the statewide coalition for after school and community schools. So I'll leave my intro at that, Michael. I'll give it to you to kind of really tell folks a little bit about yourself. But to set the stage, folks, Michael and I will have a conversation, kind of interview style. We'll go back and forth for about 20 to 30 minutes. And like I said, we'll leave the end for questions. But you can expect our conversation to go roughly about that time, give or take. So with that, folks, I'll pass it to you, Michael, to introduce yourself and kind of get us started here. I'll stop my share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ashley, for the introduction, and so excited to be talking with all of you today. And really cool to see in the chat as well where people are coming from. But yes, as was mentioned, my name is Michael Guilmette. I am a data specialist at Act Now Illinois, which is the, as was mentioned, statewide after school and community schools coalition for the state of Illinois. And our mission as an organization is to make sure that every youth in Illinois, every young person has access to quality after school and community school programming. So we do this in a variety of ways. We do this through policy and advocacy at both the state and federal level, technical assistance and professional development, both through grants and for the after school and community school field at large. And we also house the Illinois After School Quality Standards and our own self-assessment tool called the Illinois Quality Program Self-Assessment, through which programs in the field can assess their own quality against, known, tested best practices in the field. But yeah, our work that I'm a big part of is a federal grant called the Full Service Community Schools Program, and we specifically have a state scaling grant. So we are the statewide grantee that's focused on expanding community schools as a model to 32 public schools across the state, both in urban and rural communities, serving about 19,000 students, and transforming those schools into community schools through statewide technical assistance, data support, professional development, as well as funding for each site. And we also use a quasi-experimental design to use near-peer match schools so that we can see how our schools are seeing impact at the student level compared to other schools in which we're not implementing this model. But yeah, I'm also happy to explain the community school model if that would be helpful, Ashley. I
Yeah.
know that can be a nebulous
Yeah,
idea.
for sure. Please, for folks on the line that aren't familiar with that model, please give us a run through of kind of what that means to you all and what that means in general too. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so community schools, for those who aren't familiar, the essential idea is that you're transforming a public school into the hub of the community. So we like to say that community schools isn't just a set of things, it's like a feeling. It's a school that you walk into and you feel, wow, like everyone's connected here, like everything is working really well, like students are excited to be here and have opportunities to have all of their needs met. And the main model for community schools that's followed is the four-pillar model, which focuses on integrated student supports, which can be things like dental clinics, food supports, helping with housing. It also includes family and community engagement. So making sure that you're bringing family members and community members into the school, but also that you're going out into the community. That your school is a part of the community that you're in. It's also collaborative leadership, so making sure that everyone has a say, whether that's staff, any staff member, but it's also students, parents, people in the community who are impacted by school level decisions that are made. And then also expanded and enriched learning time, which includes those after school, before school programs, as well as just making sure that the curriculum during the school day is really high quality. And yeah, that's essentially what a community school is, but everyone has their own take on it. And really, no community schools look alike because no two communities are the same. And so it's really adapting to whatever the community needs.
Right. Awesome. I love that point that, yeah, just, no two communities look the same. So of course, no two community schools are going to look the same. So good reminder for folks online, but thanks for giving us that kind of overview and explanation of it. And also going into Act Now and kind of what y'all do and what the mission behind Act Now is and how you guys serve your community. Michael, for folks on the line meeting you for today, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about just yourself in general and kind of what brought you to Act Now and what drew you to the community school model and like working with community schools? Kind of give us a run through of how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up, like so many people, I was involved in various youth development spaces and clubs and sports. I was a part of 4-H. I was a part of the robotics team. And so that was just like a big part of what made my childhood enjoyable and what helped me make friends and form relationships with other youth and form relationships with adult mentors that were really important to me. And so when I was in college, I also wanted to get involved in giving youth those opportunities. So I was involved in, mentorship programs. I was a music teacher for 3 years for youth on the south side of Chicago. I also volunteered as an academic tutor through an organization called the Neighborhood Schools Program. So I was really involved in those spaces. And while I was in those spaces, I learned about the community school model during college and just was so excited about the holistic approach that it has to schooling as not just what happens in the classroom, but also what happens, in a student's day-to-day life. And making those things work together seamlessly. So I ended up writing my master's thesis about networks of trust among parents and community members in one neighborhood's community schools. And then after graduation, I was able to join Act Now's full service community schools project just as they were getting started and help them develop some of their data infrastructure. So setting up Apricot social solutions, formalizing some of our internal data processes, creating documentation internally, as well as for our school partners that we work with. But yeah, and now my role varies pretty widely from helping with reporting to the Department of Education on our grant outcomes, but also helping schools with everything from conducting an asset needs assessment to just how do I take attendance. And then also I work with our external evaluator for the grant on how to best communicate this impact to funders in the future, as well as just, make sure we're developing best practices and memorializing that.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, I know we're going to kind of get into that a little later in the conversation. So we'll put a pin on that. But curious to know, Michael, in terms of kind of how you got started and joining when you all were setting up Apricot. And I know you kind of joined at that time, but can you share with us kind of how has integrating those systems and the data changes, how has that changed the way that you guys operate? Kind of what were things like before? And I know you weren't on the team, so you might have a limited insight, but what were things like before and how are they now? And what have you seen that's been possible kind of implementing these systems and making changes to some of the way you guys collect data?
Yeah, absolutely. We have been a rapidly growing organization, so I sort of came in at an interesting pivot point in the way that we've worked with data. We had really limited data before this project, and it was coming from a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. Our main source of data that we were looking at was actually from the Illinois Quality Program self-assessment that we run. So programs were filling out this self-assessment, and we would get the data on what are programs prioritizing in terms of quality? What are their action plans going forward? And we use that sum to help us plan what professional development and training opportunities should we offer. But beyond that, we didn't do very much in terms of data collection and management, other than just what we were required to do for different grants. But most of that was just tracking touch points, trying to keep a general idea of how many after school programs are in the state of Illinois, which is very hard to do with a whole state and everything changing. So it was very like messy, many different places, but Apricot has really given us an opportunity to centralize a lot of that through this project. We now are able to, have consistent universal output data from the programming that's been running at sites. So we have the same forms are being filled out live by people who are running these programs. And this helps us make sure that when we're reporting to the Department of Education, we have consistent data, and everyone's filling things out the same way, and we know when they were filling it out. But it also gives schools and sites the ability to analyze data and see the reports that we're able to make, as the administrators for our Apricot site, where they can track individual student outcomes along with their existing systems or through Apricot, where they're able to more effectively tell their story themselves because they have, data in front of them that helps them show their impact and outcomes. And it also helps us to adjust our strategy more effectively. So we're able to see their needs and what they're doing on the ground and be like, okay, here's where we can offer a professional development opportunity. Here's where we can provide more support. And how can we help them adjust their strategy to needs? Helps us be a more active part of this while also taking out the burden from schools from having to send that data to us, from having to clean spreadsheets themselves and, have to try and collect all this data so that we can share the story of their impact as well at a state level. So it's really transformed our ability to talk on a state level about what's happening, but also had that local impact as well on the ability of schools to talk about what they're doing themselves.
Yeah. Awesome. And I think that's so important, right, for the schools themselves to feel empowered to say, look at all that we're doing, look at all that we've been able to accomplish and ways that we've been able to help the community. Yeah, I'm sure that that's equally as powerful for not just y'all at the top, but for them at the school level as well. Awesome. And kind of with those systems in place, I know that you guys are newer to the system and newer to the transition. So, but I am curious to know what you could maybe talk to or share about how your team specifically has been able to kind of shift focus from like just collecting data to actually driving impact. Like how has having these systems maybe made it easier, or kind of what has that shift done for the team and how y'all drive impact?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, we're pretty early in our use of Apricot. So this is our second year. We're just starting our second year of this project. So this first year has really been like a planning year primarily. So a lot of, focus on asset needs assessment, and we're still tracking some of that data in Apricot. But yeah, we're limited in what we can say in terms of impact, but we are setting some really important groundwork for what we're going to be able to say. So through Apricot, we're able to think about holistically, like what does a return on investment for these funds look like? Like we're able to track things like volunteer hours. We're able to track things like, attendance trends across programs across the state by the type of program that they are and see like how are things changing? How is our coaching affecting the coordinator at each site's ability to support their school to run, well-attended quality programming? So we're able to see that impact on a higher level. So we're working on the groundwork is essentially the answer. A lot
Yeah.
of like the impact is sort of in the works, but it's really transformed the way that we can think about measuring impact, as a state coalition, because it's so hard when you're not the one doing the work, to think about impact. And the youth development space is often a very overworked space and underpaid space, and so it can be very hard to be constantly hassling people to send you data, to send you information, to fill out forms. And so Apricot gives us the opportunity, as I mentioned before, to sort of get all that data ourselves, but also to build reports that can help us tell that story of impact. But yeah, we've collected it in various ways, like through our asset needs assessment, which I know we'll talk about later, to
Yeah.
sort of like tell our statewide story, even in this planning phase too.
Right. Absolutely. Well, as you guys are laying that groundwork, it sounds like we might need a part two to this conversation. Once we have more data, and we can have you come back and kind of tell us some of the findings with the data and having more data in your system. But
Yeah,
definitely
call
makes
me in a
sense.
few years.
There we go. We'll have a part two, everyone. Awesome. I also am curious to know, with the tools in place now, how, like, are there any kind of trends or types of insights that you all have been able to see now that your data is all in one place? Like, just kind of strictly off of what you all have now so far. Yeah, any interesting insights that you've been able to see, or any interesting data trends that you guys have been able to see as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, we're sort of just starting to see some of the groundwork come in for tracking things like number of students served. I mean, that was a big thing that we were really prioritizing with Apricot is that the Department of Education wants us to track unduplicated number of individuals broken out by impact group who are served by these programs. And so we're able to see that. We're also able to see dosage because of that, like how much like how many hours of programming are each individual receiving. And we also, one interesting thing that we've been able to look at is like the types of partnerships that schools are making and how they're leveraging those for referrals. So one of our tier one forms in Apricot is a partner organization profile where folks are tracking the organizations that they partner with because partnerships are such an important part of community schools, having those external organizations involved in the work. And it's been really amazing just to see the sheer number of partnerships that have been developed in these early years. I mean, we have well over 100 partner organizations identified that schools are working really closely to. And some of these are multi-site partners. So they may be like statewide mental health organizations, but a lot of them are local businesses, which has been really exciting, especially in our rural communities. Often it's local businesses, often it's the post office, is an important place, for the community, an important place where you can reach people who are in the community who, you may not otherwise be able to reach out to as a school in your like limited view of the community. So we've gotten some really interesting insights into, who do folks count on in their community. And that's been really exciting. And we're also hoping to use that to talk a bit more about like, you know, when we see more data on who are individuals being referred to, that can help us show the impact of this program. Because so many schools are now focusing on forging these relationships and throughout this first year and through this summer as well. So there's an interesting emerging trend there in story. Even
Right.
if we can't fully talk about like trends over time quite yet. But we're also tracking things like volunteer hours, attendance trends, as I mentioned, and the asset and needs assessment trends. So in addition, we also had a asset and needs assessment survey that we distributed through Apricot. And so we were able to bring all the data together from respondents from the impact groups of like staff members at the school, students, family members, community members, bring that all together and then look from a statewide lens, from a regional lens, from, an urban versus rural lens, like what are we seeing in terms of like what are the emerging needs?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ones is mental health supports.
Yeah.
That has been really important, and knowing that has helped us to really focus this year's professional development on mental health supports, and making sure that we have like connections with partners that provide mental health first aid training to program providers, so that folks can come out and get either in-person or virtual training on mental health first aid, and that has been a huge need as well. So it helps us see that and also provide evidence for that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's great. I think, excuse me, I think that that kind of shows funders the trajectory of, all the communities that you serve and the change that you all are making in your community. And I could imagine that, of course funders want to see that, and making having that makes that a lot easier to show them that. Something I'm excited for us to talk about, and something that I know we had talked about in our initial conversation, and we've kind of touched on it so far today, is that needs assessment that you all facilitate. Please give us a little bit of insight into the needs assessment. What data are you guys collecting, and how does that data that you are collecting ultimately help you all not only understand your community's, priorities, but like respond to them in turn? Like, please share more about it. I'm very curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Center for Community Schools has an asset needs assessment process that's pretty standardized. And we sort of took that and adapted it to fit our program and created guidance. So these asset needs assessments were conducted at the school level by our site coordinators, our community school coordinators, using sort of these tools, and using Apricot as a touch point for this so that we could see what they were seeing, and view these trends across the state. So these included archival data review. So they were collecting available data about, achievement at the school, but also about, community level indicators. So things like childhood asthma rates and juvenile crime rates. They also did asset mapping, so that's looking at those partner organizations in the community, which they were putting into Apricot as they went through. And these were really important because each site has an advisory council where they talk to the community about the needs that they have and what support they want to see. And so this was like a starting point of like, okay, we're getting an idea of who's at the table, who needs to be a part of this. Then we have the ANA survey, so the Asset Needs Assessment Survey, which we created in Apricot, in 9 languages and for 4 different impact groups. So using form logic, we were able to build that. And that way we were able to use intake forms on Apricot so that we had 32 copies of the same form that automatically, based on the link that they used to fill it out, sorted the responses so that only the individuals at those schools would have access to data or from folks who were responding to the survey from that school.
Nice.
And so that was super helpful. And then after that, they were conducting interviews and focus groups to learn more about those surveys. They put those all, compiled them into site level reports, and then sent those up to us so that we could see trends as well, including the stuff from interviews and focus groups. And then they went to their communities, got community feedback, and created implementation plans where they established a clear theory of change based on that archival data, those existing assets, those survey results, that community feedback. And then they took that and set SMARTY goals in their implementation plan as well. So they took long-term objectives that they had, set those intermediary SMARTY goals, and then developed initiatives based on that. And so this was a process that really helped them to justify what they're doing and figure out what their community needs and how it connects to what this grant is aimed at accomplishing. But it also gave coordinators an opportunity to get used to the school community, to learn, some of them were existing, pillars of the community. Some of them may have been teachers or social workers who came into this role. So they got to learn about the school. They got to learn about what their community hopes for and dreams of in the future. And we also, because of doing this through Apricot, were able to see at every level how this was happening, what trends are we seeing, what needs are emerging, as I mentioned. So that when we got to those implementation plans, we could also communicate not only, what our school is doing, but, as you mentioned, talking to funders, like talking about like why are they doing it? What processes did they use to get to that point, which is really valuable when you're talking about grant funding.
Yeah, for sure. Something that you just touched on and again touched on in our initial conversation, which I'm so excited to dive a little bit more into, are SMARTY goals. I know most folks on the line are probably familiar with just SMART goals, but can you talk a little bit about SMARTY goals? I had personally not heard of heard of that framework. So can you share a little bit more about that and kind of what you all have found to be impactful about adopting this framework as, you know, as opposed to just your standard SMART goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know even within SMART goals, there's different, slightly different acronyms even. So it
Right.
can be tricky, but yeah, absolutely. So we use SMARTY goals. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. And we've really found that naming inclusivity and equity in the goal setting process, really has a strong effect on the way that we think about impact as an organization and the way that our coordinators are thinking about impact at the site level. And it really keeps the schools grounded in the communities that they serve. It even prompts questions when you're setting those goals of who's at the table when you're setting those goals, and like makes sure that they're asking themselves as they're goal setting, like are our goals just aimed at improving averages, or are we actually trying to do things like close gaps, and expand access? Like as I mentioned, our mission is that everyone has access to these supports through community schools and after school. And so it's really important that we're thinking about how is everyone going to be supported through this program. And to be effective, you have to be fair and you have to be responsive. And so it makes sure that we're thinking about it not just as hitting metrics, but making sure that we're doing it in a way that reflects our values and reflects the individual values of a community. So like, for example, everyone's thinking about chronic absenteeism right now, especially post-pandemic. But at our rural sites, that the way to address that is different than in an urban site.
Yeah.
The reason that students are chronically absent may be different. In a lot of our rural communities, it comes down to transportation. Whereas in a lot of our urban communities, we're seeing different needs, because often transportation is more available. And so that's not always the solution. Maybe it's a walking bus, as we've seen in a lot of our elementary schools. So it's not necessarily having a way to get there, but it's making sure that you are safe when you're traveling there, making sure that your family feels like you're safe when you're getting there. So it may not, while at a rural site, it may be investing in, renting a van to transport students, but in an urban site, because it's generally smaller within the neighborhood, a van might not be the right fit for the community. It might just be best to have some staff members making sure everyone's doing okay and knows the way and walks safely, and just giving folks that peace of mind. So it also makes them hyper local. It helps you not think too broadly, and paint in too broad of strokes when you're thinking about the communities that you're serving and the way that you're doing it.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of making sure to keep the community that you serve in mind when you're coming up with different solutions for some of the problems that they might be facing. I think it's very easy to kind of place a blanket on some issues and think that it will work for one community, work for one city, work for one town. So I love that you all take the approach of making sure that you're looking at the community, looking at whether it's rural, urban, you know, where it is and how that community operates and functions. I think that's super super important. And like I said before our conversation, I hadn't heard of smart T goals specifically, so
Yeah,
it's definitely something that I want to take with me, and see how I can apply it just in my own personal life but here at work as well. I think it's super super important and super insightful.
yeah,
Do you mind
absolutely.
sharing with folks like an example of a smarty goal that you guys have, and maybe one that's really helped you guys make meaningful shift in your work or the strategy that you all approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So we as an organization have also been using Smarty goals to guide our own internal work. So in addition to just modeling to our partners how to set Smarty goals effectively, it's really been helpful for us in our own process. So one Smarty goal that we set was around our Illinois Quality Program self-assessment, the ILQPSA, which is an existing tool, as I mentioned, that we house, but can be a challenging process and is required for certain grants to complete it. And so we've always historically come at it kind of by necessity from a compliance point of view, which has been challenging with partners at times because it gets your partners into the mindset that like, oh, I just need to do this. I just need to finish it. And so we set a SMARTY goal. We were thinking about our goal for completion of the ILQPSA, and our SMARTY goal focused on not only specifically when do we want this finished, but thinking about time bound, we were thinking also about like milestones for when are we checking in, when are we providing supports, how are we making sure that we're measuring this throughout the process and not just making sure it's a check at the end. How are we making this feel relevant to the communities that we're serving? So as a part of that, we're providing additional options for feedback on the process from our partners to make sure that it feels relevant, because ultimately it's a tool that's meant for them. And then adding that I and that E to the SMARTY goals has helped us to think about what barriers to access might be created. Like, why might people be struggling to complete the ILQPSA? And it's helped us think about things like accommodating various levels of digital literacy in the process, because it's an online process and it can be challenging to fill out this online process that has its own website, its own way of doing things, especially if your work is after school. Like, your skill is that you're a people person, that you're able to connect with youth. And so we're adding additional training that meets people where they are and making sure that we integrate this into existing training opportunities where people who need to know this information will already be, so that they don't have the burden of having to come to a new space for this information to carve out more time. And then thinking about, being equitable has led us to sort of continuing our standards revision process, which we've haven't revised them in about 10 years, and things change a lot. Socio-emotional learning is a big thing now, and something that we definitely want integrated, but we've also been bringing in partners into this revision process so that they can provide their input and actually help us to write the standards that will be used for the next a few years for programs to assess themselves. So making sure that like we are not only reflecting the scientific best practices, but we are reflecting the reality of programs and making sure that we're making this relevant not only to an urban program, as we are an organization set in Chicago. So like that is our innate perspective for most of our staff members, but also that this makes sense for rural spaces. This makes sense for programs that happen in the school as well as, in a community center. So that lens has really helped us to make sure that we're bringing everyone in, meeting them where they're at, and making something that applies to them.
Nice. Awesome. Something that I wanted to touch on, just with like the current affairs and things like that. When we're talking about funding, I know we've mentioned it a little bit throughout today's conversation, and obviously the importance of the data that y'all collect for reporting up to funders. But when it comes to funding, I know that there's, of course, been some uncertainty around some of the federal funding and just funding environments in general for so many organizations. Do you mind sharing what approach you all are taking or planning to take for sustainability, and how you all want to maintain that long-term impact, and how you all manage that with kind of the uncertainty that we're unfortunately facing right now?
Definitely. And I mean, we know this firsthand as a federally funded program through the Department of Education, just how precarious the work can be, especially funding wise. But we have been trying our best to just stay the ship because it's so important that we just keep doing the work. It's important for a continued funding that we, make sure that we're doing what we say that we're doing, that we don't compromise, that we don't change what we're doing because we're afraid of the funding changing. But the lens we've been looking at it as an organization through has been this 4Ps model that the Institute for Educational Leadership has, IEL, and it's people, provisions, practices, and policies. So it's a way of thinking about sustainability as not just funding. because funding will shift over time, but there are strategies you can use to sustain the work over time generally. So, we're focused on providing really high quality professional development to people, making sure that we're creating a strong workforce who's able to advocate for themselves, to advocate for, you know, the resources that they need, that they're trained to do the work that they need to do, and that they can express that to other people, to funders in the future. We're also, making sure that we're investing in provisions. We're thinking about how can we use our money to create infrastructure that will last. So at a school level, this might be like you've been thinking about putting more benches around your playground so it can be more of a community gathering space. Like invest in those benches now, because if funding changes, you still have those benches. Making sure that we're building practices so that we're, recording the best practices for the field that we're discovering, making sure that we're noting everything that we learn, distributing it to the field, publishing when we can. One of my coworkers likes to describe the current situation with especially education research and its availability as like the burning of the Library of Alexandria, where like all this knowledge is in flux and possibly being lost. And like we need to make sure that what we've learned lasts, and that it's accessible, and that we get it out now. So it's definitely made us think more immediately about, making sure that we're recording everything so that if this work picks up in the future, we are ready to pick it back up where we left it off. And then the last P is policy. So we're always advocating to policymakers, especially now with the federal environment, we're focused on the state level a lot. One of our goals as a state scaling grantee is to make sure that the state continues the funding for community schools after the term of this 5-year grant. So we're constantly in communication with policymakers on how can we create grant programs and creatively fund these programs, to make sure that we're sustaining this work through policy and creating a groundswell of support for these programs. So it's definitely a challenging time to think about funding and sustainability, but it's really just being committed to the work, being as adaptable as possible, not necessarily committing yourself to one thing, to one funding line forever, and making sure, keeping those 4 Ps in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love what you said about making sure to the importance of investing those funds in things that will last beyond the funding itself. I think that's really critical and really actually very insightful so that folks, I think sometimes we can get so sucked into wanting to make change today and wanting to see that change today or, of course, as soon as possible. But there is definitely something to be said about something that grows with time, and being able to invest in that can just continue to reap those benefits long after those funds may come. We're hoping not. We're hoping they keep always coming to you guys, but just in case they don't, super important. Well, Michael, we have covered a lot of ground here today, but before we shift into Q&A, I want to give folks a little bit of time to drop in some questions into the Q&A and into the chat. But while they do that, Michael, do you have any final thoughts or any wisdom you'd like to share with some of the nonprofit leaders that are here today that might be facing kind of messy data and disconnected tools? And what kind of advice or wisdom would you share to them as they try to move forward with a more strategic system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, go for it. I would encourage you to, try to centralize things as much as possible. It can be so hard to tell a story when everything is in different places, in different formats. And, invest in it. It is an important part of, what it means to share your story, to share your impact, to be able to pull that data all together, because it's been so impactful for us. But I would also just say, like, do what you can. Like, just keep going. The work is so important. Every organization has such a massive impact, and I would just encourage folks to keep going with what you got. Do the best that you can. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. And really just stay in conversation with communities that you serve as much as possible. And really, as you build these systems and as you think about centralizing the work and how you do it, um, try to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's responsive to the communities that shares power and leadership in the data work. Because it
Yeah.
can be so easy to think about, you're the lofty individual looking at what everything that's happening and making sense of it. But letting people make sense of it themselves throughout this process, like we did during our asset needs assessment process, can really help with storytelling and helps you build advocates that sustain this work even beyond your involvement in it. So I would just encourage folks to, keep your head up, keep talking to your communities and, you know, to do the best you can, try and centralize it as much as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I really love what you said. And I need to write that down for my own personal self is don't let perfect get in the way of good. So something I need to take with me. Maybe folks can take that with themselves if they take one thing. Because that can definitely come out in our work life, personal life, all of our personal goals and work goals. Sometimes you want to hit perfect and it can maybe put you into a little bit of a freeze mode and not really even get good because you're trying so hard to get perfect. So very,
Yeah,
very true.
absolutely.
Very, very true, Michael. Awesome. Michael, this was such an insightful conversation, such a great conversation. It was wonderful chatting with you, not only learning more about you, but really learning more about Act Now and learning more about some of the great work that you all are doing, especially being a fellow Chicagoan. It's great to see the work that's being done to service our schools, and it's very important work. And I really just appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon and kind of walking us through all of that. But folks, we are going to go ahead and transition to Q&A in just a moment here. But for folks that are on the line, if you are interested and kind of gathering tools to help you better collect your data and have that unified approach to your programs. If you're interested in exploring Bonterra Apricot, I did go ahead and launch another poll here. Like I mentioned earlier, please feel free to fill that poll out. And then once we wrap up today, I'll have one of my colleagues reach out to you to initiate those conversations and answer some of those questions and kind of talk to you about the tools that we have that similar to Act Now is using that might be able to help you in your programs and collecting that data. Um, awesome. Well, I'll give folks a little bit of time to fill that out and we can go ahead and transition to Q&A. Michael, it looks like we have a couple of questions that have come through. Excuse me. The first question, does Act Now and or the Community Schools program, do they support specifically LGBTQ plus students' needs? I know that maybe in your Smarty goals, that equity and inclusion, is that something that you all address specifically, or is that something that you could touch on for just the community schools program as a whole?
Absolutely. We definitely, when we think about, our goal of making sure that every student in Illinois, every, young person in Illinois has access to quality after school and community schools. That includes our LGBTQ youth in the state. And also, thinking about quality means thinking about including them, making sure that it's not just, a quality program, period. It's like a quality program for everyone. It fits needs. So we do offer trainings from our staff that are developed on, gender and sexuality and sort of a 101 course for practitioners in the after school and community schools field. So we do offer that as a support. And we have technical assistance specialists who are very knowledgeable in that space and can help people apply those best practices in those spaces. As far as the community schools work that's happening on the ground, we, are often having those conversations about, how to be inclusive of all identities, in your programming. So that's a conversation that we have a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's good to know. And very also important part of the work and important part of addressing the community. Because our community is made up of so many different kinds of people and so many different kinds of students. So awesome. It looks like we have another question come in. And Lynn asked, your models are all important and good. Are you also thinking of generating predictive and analytics based on the existing models that you guys use?
We currently have not explored this, so we haven't been looking at predictive analytics. We're mostly looking at currently just, initially what's occurring. But definitely something that I'd be interested in learning more about and exploring in the future, as we gather more data on what's happening on the ground.
So, perfect. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. I'm going to give folks a little bit of time. I always think a lack of questions means that you did a great job through everything, so clear and cohesive, and that's how I take it sometimes. But sometimes folks are a little shy in their questions, so I'll give folks a couple more seconds here, a couple more minutes here to drop those into the chat. But while they do that, Michael, again, already know I say in your praise, but again, thank you so much for doing this session. Thank you for all the work that you put into this session, and really coming here and setting the stage for folks, and doing such a great job at doing it. And it was such a great conversation. And yeah, like I said earlier, we'll have to have you on for part 2 in a couple of years when you guys have more data. And we can even replay this. We can maybe do a little recap and then we'll come back.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always, looking forward to more opportunities where we can tell our story. But
Yeah,
yeah, appreciate everyone for coming and listening, and always happy to talk to folks about community schools, the model, the way that we use data. I'm a firm believer in it, so I'm always happy to talk to folks about it as well, and making sure that we're developing programming that's serving all youth, not just
yeah,
in Illinois, but everywhere in the country. So thank you
yeah.
for the opportunity to talk about it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And folks on the line, thank you. Like Michael said, thank you for your time and your attention this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your engagement with such insightful questions and your engagement in the chat. We really appreciate it. And it always makes for a great session when we have these insightful questions, and always makes for a great conversation. So we really appreciate you. We really appreciate you guys on the line. And Lynn, I see your question, the decision platform. I have not heard of this. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, Michael. TGP, the decision
No, I
platform.
have not
Yeah,
heard of
it's
this.
something to look into, and I can look into it once we wrap up here. I've not heard of it, but thank you, Lynn. I will keep note of that, and I'll
Yeah,
look into it after today's session. But again, folks, thank you on the line for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for your time and attention, Michael. Thank you so, so much. And like I mentioned earlier, we did record this session, everyone. So we'll be sending that out to your email sometime next week. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And we definitely look forward to seeing you all at our next session. Bye, everyone.
thanks.